Hello everyone, and welcome back to another journey with Fogman. What you're seeing right now is Google Earth, and today, I'll be using it to take you closer to a very special place, a place that truly exists. Right here in the heart of modern-day Saigon. But beneath its surface, it holds stories that have long been left untold. This isn't a fictional location. It's real, with moss-covered walls, aging wooden shutters, and echoes of something that lingers quietly in time. I'll slowly zoom in, so you can get a better sense of where this old mansion stands, the very place where today's story begins. A story filled with emotion, a touch of sorrow, and yes, maybe just a little bit haunted. Alright, I'll see you in the main part of the story. Get ready, because room 14 is about to open. Chapter 1. Hello everyone. It's great to see you back in our series Ghost Stories of Saigon, where I share tales that might be true, or might have been reimagined a little, made more mysterious and suspenseful, yet still holding the spirit of old Saigon, a city both dazzling and deeply haunted. Today's story is no different. It's about an old French-style villa nestled in the heart of the city, a place where, back in the day, neighbors would avoid looking up to the second floor. This house stands on what used to be Gia Long Street, now known as Li Tu Trong, once the very pulse of Saigon in the 1960s and 70s. Motorbikes like Honda Dames and Vespas zipped by. Girls in white dye fluttered through golden sunshine, and coffee shops on the sidewalk were filled with the slow drip of fin filters. But behind all that charm were shadows that no one dared speak of. That villa, it's said, belonged to a wealthy Chinese Vietnamese family. Today, it functions as a private museum, but strange stories still circle the place. People say the lights on the second floor flicker on at night, even though no one's supposed to be there. Some claim they've heard footsteps dragging across the wooden floors, or sobbing sounds coming from behind a door that, according to whispers, has remained locked for decades. That's door number 14. So today, I invite you to step with me past its rusted iron gates. Gently push open the aged wooden door, and discover what really lies within. And hey, before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next story. Now then, let's go upstairs and open door number 14 together. Back then, I was just 23 years old, fresh out of a vocational school for cinematography. I lived with my family in a small alley near Nguyen Tri Phuong Market. My father passed away when I was little, so it was my mother who raised me and my younger brother. I was the eldest, so by the time I was 16, I was already helping my mom sell broken rice on the sidewalk. Juggling school and work, we were never well off, but she always managed to scrape together enough for me to learn a trade. After graduation, I jumped from job to job, helping out with Kai Luong stage plays, filming weddings, even assembling stage sets for pop concerts at Quoc Ton Theater. One sunny day, a former teacher introduced me to a gig filming archival footage for a private museum downtown. I was thrilled. Landing work around Gia Long Street? That was something only the lucky ones got. The villa stood quietly behind neatly trimmed hibiscus bushes. Its iron gate was rusted, The nameplate tilted at an angle, but as soon as I stepped into the courtyard, it felt like another world. Mosaic tiles in French style, long hallways, chandeliers hanging from high ceilings, and the faint scent of incense mixing with old wood. Every footstep echoed like a whisper from the past. Rumor had it this house once belonged to a trading tycoon from Cholang. Someone people simply called Mr. Lamb, no full name, no known descendants. I started filming on the ground floor. The living room alone was half the size of my whole house, with a European-style fireplace, pearl-inlaid tea tables, and a faded Persian rug that still held an air of elegance. Every room told its own story, from a rusty grandfather clock to a torn oil painting. But my eyes kept drifting to one particular spot, a dark mahogany door at the end of the second-floor hallway. No nameplate, no number, always locked. Don't film that room, okay? Leave it alone. It's not good. An older staff member warned me, not meeting my eyes. Her voice was as soft as wind through dry leaves. I nodded, but something inside me stirred, a mix of curiosity and unease. That night, I reviewed the footage at home. While scrubbing through a hallway shot, I froze. The camera had panned slowly toward that very door, even though I was sure I hadn't aimed it that way. Stranger still, there were sounds in the clip. A soft clack, like someone turning the doorknob. Clear as day, but the screen showed an empty hallway. The next morning, I returned to the villa to film more shots of the grand staircase, the one with the crystal chandelier suspended in midair. As I adjusted my tripod, a sudden chill ran down my spine. From upstairs came the faint sound of footsteps. Light, bare, slow, dragging. I looked up. No one was there. Compelled by something I couldn't explain, I climbed to the second floor and walked down the corridor. I stopped at the door. My hand rosé, touched the knob, and turned. It opened. The day before, it was locked, but now, it swung open like it had never been sealed. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. It was a small room with a large window facing an old frangipani tree in the yard. White curtains fluttered gently, though there was no breeze. On the wall hung a few old photos, blurred with age, possibly portraits of a woman in traditional áo dai. The long, flowing Vietnamese dress. A tall mirror stood opposite the doorway, casting a pale reflection of light, and something else I couldn't name. On the table lay a carved ivory comb, an old Chinese-style powder box, and a handkerchief embroidered with apricot blossoms, yellowed with time. The air smelled damp, tinged with the faint sweetness of jasmine oil. Everything about it made my skin crawl. I lifted my camera and began filming. But as the lens passed across the mirror, my heart stopped. A figure stood behind me. A woman, long hair, dressed in a flowing white áo dai, motionless. Her face was blurred, but her presence was undeniable. I spun around. Nothing. I looked back at the mirror. Also empty. Just my reflection, drenched in sweat. That was the moment I knew. I had opened a door that was never meant to be opened. Chapter 2. The Maid's Diary. After that day, something inside me changed. It felt like I had stepped into a place I wasn't supposed to. Touched something that should have been left alone. Every night, I dreamed of that room, the flowing curtains, pale sunlight spilling in, and that tall mirror leaning against the wall. But in every dream, there was always a figure behind me in the mirror. Sometimes it was a girl in a white dye. Sometimes just a blurry shadow with long hair cascading down her back. I would wake drenched in sweat, heart pounding. I began to investigate the villa. Most staff at the museum shook their heads, saying they knew nothing, or maybe they knew and just didn't want to say. Only one man, an old guard named Tu Bin, who had worked there even before it opened to the public, was willing to speak. This house used to belong to Mr. Lam, very wealthy, but filled with sorrow. He spoke slowly, eyes distant, as if reliving something long buried. I was a gardener here before 75. At first, nothing seemed strange. The owners were private people, rarely seen outside. They had a daughter, said to be breathtakingly beautiful, but no one ever met her. She lived on the second floor, always accompanied by servants. One day, while I was watering the plants, I looked up and saw her on the balcony. Big eyes, so sad, but incredibly beautiful. My heart skipped a beat. After that day, I never saw her again. Then people started whispering that she had died, but there was no funeral, no altar, no photo, as if she had never existed. His words gave me chills. When I asked more, he just shook his head, then pulled a small cloth-wrapped notebook from his pocket. This belonged to a maid who was very close to the girl. Her name was Lan. We used to talk often. After the girl died, Lan left, but before she went, she gave me this diary. I've kept it in a trunk for years. Never dared to open it. Just found it again while cleaning. Here, take a look. But don't tell anyone you read it, or you might invite trouble. The paper was yellowed with age. The ink had faded. The handwriting slanted and delicate. I took it home, hesitated for hours before I dared open it. The first page read, "Diary of Lan, maid of the second floor." I read it page by page, word by word, like being pulled into another world, where the second floor wasn't just a living space, but a velvet prison. Today, the young mistress cried again. She said she missed school, her friends, the days she went to the opera with her mother. But Madam won't let her out of the room. Says the outside world is dangerous. That the girl is ill and mustn't see anyone. But she seems healthy to me. Maybe just a bit pale from staying indoors too long. She asked to go down to the garden, but Madam scolded her harshly and told me to watch her closely. I felt so sorry but didn't know what to do. These days, she keeps staring into the mirror. I asked her why. She just smiled sadly. She said, "Lan, do you think I'm still me?" I didn't understand. Her eyes were strange, like a deep, bottomless well. Looking into them made me uneasy. Last night, I heard music from her room, a soft melody from the zither. But when I opened the door, she was sitting still, not playing, not singing. I asked, and she said, "It wasn't me, it was the one in the mirror." I froze, then quietly shut the door. One night, I heard footsteps, bare feet on the wooden floor outside my room. I peeked out and saw her standing in front of the hallway mirror, combing her hair, but her reflection wasn't moving. It just stared back at her. When I was about to call out, The reflection turned and looked straight at me. I slammed my door shut, heart racing. Today, she didn't eat, lay in bed all day. I saw bruises on her arm. When I asked, she hid them, saying it was nothing. But her eyes, they were screaming. I once overheard the master and madam arguing downstairs. Madam hissed, "She's not normal. We must lock her up before anyone finds out." I couldn't believe it. The girl was so gentle, so kind. Or was there something I didn't know? This afternoon, while tidying her room, I found a folded paper under her pillow. She snatched it away, but I glimpsed an old photograph of a man in military uniform. It was worn and creased. She clutched it to her chest and cried silently. Perhaps that was the man she loved. That night, she told me, "If anything happens to me, keep this diary. Don't let them burn it. The truth is inside. I don't want to vanish like a ghost." I cried. I didn't know why. My chest just felt unbearably heavy. I couldn't read anymore. My hands trembled. The air around me grew cold. My spine tingled. I remembered the shadow in the mirror, slender, long-haired, standing behind me without a sound. Was it her? The girl in the diary? Or something else, no longer human? I wrapped the diary back in its cloth and placed it beside my bed. That night, I couldn't sleep. In the dark, I heard a tapping sound, soft and steady, like fingernails on glass. Tap, tap, tap. I opened my eyes, looked around. There were no mirrors in my room. But the tapping didn't stop. And then I realized, the sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the closet. Chapter 3. The Call from the Mirror. Ever since I finished reading the diary, I felt like a shell of myself. Everywhere I went, I sensed something, or someone, watching me. Like a cold breath brushing the back of my neck. I couldn't bring myself to look into mirrors. Every time I caught my reflection, my heart would race, afraid that what I saw staring back wouldn't be just me. At night, strange sounds started coming from my tiny rental room. Soft tapping on the glass window, even though there wasn't a window. The rattle of a doorknob being turned, though the door was locked from the inside. Sometimes I thought I glimpsed someone in the hallway outside. But when I opened the door, it was always empty. My dreams became more vivid. I was back in room 14, standing in front of that mirror. And in the reflection, something that wasn't me was staring back. I told my friend Hung. He's a professional photographer and kind of a thrill seeker. He's explored abandoned houses, filmed in cemeteries, never flinched. When he heard my story, he didn't laugh or doubt me. He simply said, "Let's go back there, at night, with me there. We'll catch whatever's going on." I hesitated, but eventually agreed. Partly because I couldn't sleep at night, and partly because I felt like I owed it to that trapped soul. Maybe if I returned, I could understand what's been buried behind that cursed door 14. That night, Hung and I brought our gear, camera, flashlights, a voice recorder, even an old tripod. We waited until after 10 p.m., after the museum had closed, then snuck in through the back wall. The villa at night was nothing like it was during the day. The walls looked older, stained. Moonlight cast warped shadows across the floor. Wind hissed through cracks in the windows. sounding eerily like whispers. The faded portraits on the walls seemed to stare directly at us. One frame even fell with a soft thud just as we walked past, nearly making Hung drop the camera. We climbed the stairs slowly, each step echoing too loudly. The air grew heavy and still. When we reached the hallway, I saw it. Door 14, slightly ajar. I was certain I had shut it before. Inside, the room looked the same but with a strange glow. A faint bluish mist drifted through the air. The mirror stood where it always had, tall, ancient, cold. The curtains stirred even though there was no wind. On the vanity, the ivory comb from before was gone. Hung set up the camera, pointing it directly at the mirror. I stood to the side, flashlight in hand. It was dead silent, except for the soft hum of the camera rolling. Suddenly, my flashlight flickered. I smacked it a few times, annoyed, then turned to Hung, only to see the color drain from his face. "Look, the mirror," he whispered. I turned. There were 3 of us in that reflection. A girl in a white-out dye stood behind me. Her long hair flowed down her back. I spun around. No one. I looked at the mirror again. She was still there, eyes locked on mine. My hand trembled. The flashlight slipped from my fingers and clattered to the floor. At the same time, our recorder began to buzz. Then, a faint female voice emerged. Lan, please, help me." We froze. Hung tried to stop the recording, but the button didn't respond. The screen suddenly shifted to playback mode, showing the footage we had just filmed. But instead of us in the frame, there was only the empty room and the mirror. We were missing. "Shut it off. It's playing by itself," Hung yelled. I lunged forward and yanked the power cord. The room's light popped and died. Total darkness. I heard frantic breathing, then footsteps. But when I switched my flashlight back on, Hung was standing still, pale, his eyes wide in terror. "You okay?" I asked. He didn't answer. I grabbed his shoulder. He collapsed to the floor, panting. After a moment, he whispered. A hand, from the mirror, grabbed me. That was it. We gathered our things and ran. Down the stairs, out the back door. As we paused to catch our breath, I turned for one last look at the house. In the second floor window, behind the white curtain, someone, or something, was watching us. I didn't return for a week after that, but each night, I still heard it, a soft voice near my ear, calling, from somewhere that wasn't here. "Lan, don't leave me. Lan." Chapter 4. Release. I used to think that leaving the villa would be the end of it. But I was wrong. Every night after our last visit, I felt like I was living inside a fog that never lifted. The voice calling, "Lan Oi," still whispered through the air, soft like a breeze past my ear, yet cold enough to send a chill down my spine, as if someone was waiting behind me for a response. I was exhausted, unable to sleep or work. Hung, too, had become someone else. He stopped taking photos altogether, wore sunglasses even indoors, smoked constantly, and sat quietly like a shadow. One day, I visited and found him curled up on his balcony under the blazing sun. When I asked what was wrong, he simply muttered, "She's in my mirror, at home." We both knew it couldn't go on. We needed to end it. We needed to help her find peace, so we could find ours too. I went back to see old Mr. Tu Bin. This time, I told him everything. He listened in silence, then let out a long sigh. Miss Tuyet Mai, she never found peace. No one ever acknowledged what happened. Everyone in the Lam family knew something wasn't right, but they were all too afraid to speak. But now someone's involved, and it needs to be undone the right way. When I asked how, he didn't answer directly. Instead, he brought me to a small house tucked in a narrow alley on Nguyen Du Street. A frail old woman opened the door. Her eyes were cloudy but sharp. Her name was Auntie Nam. She had once worked as a maid in the villa before 1968. The moment I mentioned room 14, she shivered and slowly sat down. She didn't fade away from illness. Auntie Nam said she was kept upstairs. Her lover was a military officer, but he refused to break off the relationship to marry a wealthier family's daughter. Because of that, he was taken away. Miss Mai used to hide letters beneath her pillow. One day, the madam found one. After that, she stopped smiling. Then one day, she was just gone. No farewell, no ceremony. They kept her in that room, behind the wooden wall to the left of the vanity. The mirror was to hide the truth. I felt a chill creep down my back. A wall behind the mirror? I had never thought to check. Auntie Nam handed me a small cloth pouch. Inside is her white ao dai, a hairpin, and a slip of paper with her full name. Take them, if you want to help her find peace. Place these things in the right place, at the right time, and someone must call her by her name, her real name, with sincerity. Only then will she hear. That night, Hong and I returned to the villa. This time, we were prepared. I brought the ao dai, the hairpin, and the note with her name. Hong brought the camera and recorder. Though we left them off, just silent witnesses to whatever would come. We entered room 14. I gently placed the ao dai on the table, beside the note and the hairpin. Then, together, we moved the mirror away from the wall. Behind it, aged wooden panels. I knocked gently, hollow. We pried it open with a crowbar. Dust billowed out. Inside was a small hidden space, just big enough for someone to sit. No one was there now, but a scrap of fabric remained, an old pillow, and a photograph. It was her, dressed in the white ao dai, smiling beside a man in military uniform. I placed the items into the hollow, took a deep breath, and spoke. "Tuyet Mai, if you're still here, please listen. We know you were treated unfairly. We don't want you to be trapped in this place any longer. Please, be free. Find your path. You deserve peace." The air turned noticeably colder. Hung gripped my shoulder, his hand trembling. I couldn't bring myself to look at the mirror. But then, she appeared. A faint white silhouette within the mirror. She didn't glare or scowl. She simply looked at us. For a long time. Then, slowly, a sad smile spread across her face. She bowed her head slightly, turned around, and vanished into a soft white mist. A thin crack split the center of the mirror. Then it silently broke in two. After that night, the villa was quiet. I returned a few more times, But room 14 was just a room now. The light was warm. The air was calm. Hong and I never spoke about it again. Life gradually resumed. Something had changed, though, like an old memory finally put to rest, no longer needing to be reopened. Once, I returned to the villa to film a short historical documentary. The place had been renovated, bright, tidy, and welcoming. Room 14 had been restructured. Its hidden wall removed. Now it served as just another display room. Visitors passed through without knowing what secrets it once held. After filming, I stepped outside. A breeze passed through the branches of the old frangipani tree. A single white petal floated down and landed near my foot. Suddenly, I thought of her again, the white dress, the wistful smile, the eyes that seemed to see through everything. I bowed my head, quietly, and on a rainy afternoon sometime later, I happened to pass by the old Gia Long Street. Instinctively, I looked up at the second-floor window of the villa. There it was, light glowing softly. Not electric light, but something gentler, like morning mist. I wasn't afraid, I just smiled, because I knew some presences are simply waiting to feel at peace. So, that was the very first story here on the Fogman channel. I've decided to name it Room 14 Haunting of a Saigon Mansion, a title that captures both the mystery and the quiet beauty of a city rich with memories. This story was a complete rewrite, inspired by a famous Saigon urban legend known by many as the ghost of the Hua family mansion. The original character, Mr. Hua Bon Hua, was actually one of the wealthiest and most influential businessmen in Saigon during the French colonial era. His mansion later became what we know today as the Ho Chi Minh City Museum of Fine Arts. When I reimagined this story, I didn't want to make it overly frightening or shocking. I simply wanted to tell a story, a quiet, eerie, and maybe a little melancholic echo from the past. A tale of someone who never wanted to scare us, just someone trying to find their way home. If this story touched you in any way, or left you feeling something, fear, sadness, or simply curiosity, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you have a personal story to share, something from your family, your neighborhood, or even a friend, feel free to send it to the email in the video description. Fogman is always open to listening, and I'll do my best to bring your story to life with respect and care. If you enjoyed this first episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. This is just the beginning. There are many more stories waiting to be told. Wishing you peace, warmth, and a quiet evening. I'll see you again in the next Fogman story.